Yeah, perfect.
It started right after you made that groaning noise.
Do it again.
Okay, let's go ahead and pray before we start, shall we? Dear God, thank you so much for being our Father, and thank you for communicating with us decisively. Please help us to understand your word and to keep understanding it better and better. God, we're trying to meditate on it like you've asked, and please help it to sink in and not just to be words that we hear, but words that mean something, that change us. And God, as we explore real briefly, the last of the 10 commandments that you gave, the kind of summary of your law, God, please help us to appreciate the grace that we're living under today, and the full picture that we get to see on this side of the cross. And when we look back, we see so much more clearly. Thank you for the perspective, and please enlighten us a little bit more today from your word. It's in Jesus' name I pray. All right, the last command we left off on was do not commit adultery, correct? And I believe we made it most of the way through that, but there are a few things that we did not get around to, so I kind of want to pick up there. This is our last week of this class, so that means next week we'll have something different going on around here, and then you guys will be gone on break. We'll pick it up again. So, Ephesians 5 in the New Testament talks about submitting to one another, and it's talking about the marriage relationship. Submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. That's a New Testament perspective, way of looking at it. Very different from the mentality that people grew up under in the Old Covenant time. But when we go back to the Old Covenant, there are a few things about this idea of adultery and marriage that I do find interesting. You remember what we said last time about how what they were supposed to do if they desired a wife in battle? They stole a girl, caught me a woman, brought her back to their home. God said, you want to marry her? Hold up, you can, but shave her head, live with her for a month, just observe. And when she's no longer pretty, she's ugly, and you actually have to get to know her personality for a while, then you decide, are you going to marry her or not? And if yes, you can actually marry her because it goes more than skin deep. If not, then what? You got to set her free. You can't keep her as a slave because you put her through enough grief. You shaved her head. Come on. That's just it's love, right? So, interesting idea from the Old Testament law, but what do you think the New Testament, I shouldn't separate. What do you think the lesson is for us in something like that? What can we learn from that? Not that we should necessarily do that, but can you learn anything about, dating, relationships from that example?
It's more than just looks.
Apparently. The Doc Smith used to always say, for him the big deal was the hair curlers. Girls wearing hair curlers. He always talked about, you can't marry her until you've seen her in curlers. I'm telling you, this girl, this snake in her head. Oh, he would go off. He would talk about how awful it was. But you know what? The point is valid. Like, you need to look at them in other times too. You need to take your time and realize that looks don't last. So, Deuteronomy 21 verses 10 through 14. Let's hit that real quick, and then Exodus 22 verses 16 and 17. So, who will turn to Deuteronomy 21, 10 through 14? Thank you. Who will get Exodus 22, 16 and 17? Thank you. All right, as soon as you get to Deuteronomy 21, 10 through 14, go ahead and, you know what, that may be what we already read. Start reading it for me, if you don't mind.
Give me a second to put it in.
We didn't read that.
All right, never mind. That's good. That's the one we already read. So you look beyond looks. Now, one of the questions that gets brought up all the time is, why does God seem to be against interracial marriage? Like, why is God, why is he so strict on the Israelites, marrying within their own race? Do you know the answer to that question?
He doesn't want other people with other religions.
Yeah. Now you need to recognize I just tricked you by saying something that was completely not true.
He didn't.
God didn't say anything about
Racial.
interracial marriage, right? At least as far as what we're talking about here. The man, if he catches a wife, a foreigner, and she's not off limits for whatever reason, and he waits the month, he can take her as a wife. But what is the big deal? You were saying it. You cannot share in their religion. A lot of times to take wives from other places, oftentimes you would adapt the customs and the other things that go along with that. Who's a prime example of someone who took wives and adopted customs at the same time, even though he was smart enough to know better?
Solomon.
King Solomon, he took many wives and his wives led him astray. The women that he... Yeah.
It took a lot of them, though.
No, this is a positive. No, think about this. This is a positive thing. The wisest, smartest man the Bible says that ever lived could be tricked by a woman into doing what she wanted him to do. That's the power that you want to have.
More wise than even the smartest man.
The smartest man on earth is brought down.
Yeah, a smarter woman.
So, anyway, I just love how people think, oh yeah, I'm good with temptation. I'm not going to, they just think they're smart enough they can deal with it. It doesn't work. That's not how it works at all. Okay, it's interfaith marriage. So in the New Testament, what's the passage? Do not be what with unbelievers? Yoked together with unbelievers. Why? Because what common is there? What is there in common between righteousness and wickedness, or the temple of God and Belial is a term used, wickedness, or a term maybe talking about Satan. It's oil and water. It doesn't really mix at all. That's the idea. Now, I had a professor say that it doesn't apply to marriage. It's actually talking about business contracts and business relationships. Number one, I disagree. Number two, disagree. Think about this. Is marriage a business type relationship? Is there any business of marriage at all if you think about it?
Yes.
Lots of it.
Yeah, do you have to, I don't know, file a certificate with the government, the authority? Yeah, you do. It is a legally binding contract. So if it applies even to just regular business ventures, how about the business of life for the rest of your life? I think it definitely applies there. So that's the idea, because you cannot, it doesn't work that way. Two faiths cannot be committed to each other, their own faith, and yet somehow work together. There's going to be a contradiction. God knows it ahead of time. So nothing at all about interracial marriage. It's interfaith marriage. That's where you got to be together for the sake of your kids too. The one thing I wanted to get to, here's an interesting statistic for you. Let's read Exodus 22:16-17 first. Sorry.
No, I got it. If a man seduces a virgin who is not engaged to anyone and has sex with her, he must pay the customary bride price to marry her. But if her father refuses to let him marry her, the man must still pay an amount equal to the bride price of a virgin.
Okay. Now, the bride price of a virgin is very expensive. Remember, now he overpaid, we know that, but remember Jacob when he wanted to marry Rachel and he said, I'll work how long? 7 years? That's the bride price. Now, he could have done it for probably half that, but still, 3 years of work, that's a lot of money that you pay. So you better love this girl. You better be pretty committed to her if you're going to work for 3 years, that much money to get her. Well, if the Old Testament's telling us, God says through Moses, if a man seduces someone, a virgin, and he takes her, sleeps with her, then you need to pay the bride price and marry her. Unless her dad objects, then you still got to pay. So there's a stiff fine for sure. But this is important. Why? Well, I'll tell you why. Because in the very library that we were at today, the very library we were at, it was the Cocoa Library. Welcome, come on in. You guys remember where we were in that back room of the Cocoa Library? Well, it used to be a computer room. That used to be like a computer lab area when I was in high school, I guess, that age. And I was there on the computer for some reason, because back then the internet was not floating around in the waves. It was wired in, generally speaking. And it was probably dial-up too, it was really slow. Anyway, I was there. I was sitting down doing something, I don't remember what. Probably AOL Instant Messenger or something, I don't know. Whatever was important back then. And then a very strange, heavily bearded man came and sat next to me. Now, my email address was Seth Bourne again. That's my email address. And the man's name was Dana. found that out later. Some of you might have recognized him or know him. Dana looked over at me, big beard, looked over at me and he said, I haven't noticed your email address since the board again. Have you seen God's schedule? And I'm like, what? How? It's like, yeah, you know, the days until the solemn assembly, God's schedule. And I'm like, no, I guess I haven't. Whips out the paper. Here it is. You know, I find it useful. And he talks about the solemn assembly and the schedule of God. And a lot of people, he begins to lecture me about the things of God. You know, things that memories he stores in his beard somewhere, and he pulls them out and things. I mean, this beard was big. The paper might have come from it too. You know? But anyway, he had this paper, God's schedule, written out there all the way till the end. Said solemn assembly. I think it had a date by it too. It was very convenient. And so Dana is just outlining this stuff for me, talking really fast. I cannot get my mind around what he's saying, and I'm so distracted by his face and his beard anyway. It's, you know, scary. But he keeps on going. But one of the things I do remember him saying is a lot of people just don't realize how marriage works. If you have sex with someone, you're married to them in God's eyes. You're married. And then every time you sleep with somebody else, you're breaking the marriage covenant. You're just, and he just went on. He thought that sex equals marriage in God's eyes. That's what he was saying. And that pretty much had nothing to do with God's schedule, which confused me even more. Why are you talking about that in the midst of God's great schedule? What is the solemn assembly that I've never seen in the Bible anywhere, but you have it on this paper, and you have a date, and God said it, and blah, blah, blah. Well, this passage just told us something interesting, right? If you sleep with someone, does that mean in God's eyes you're married to them? No, it does not. In the Old Testament, the law said you should marry them because back then you
Continue when they search your
yes, I was going to say the word marketability, but what you said probably sounds a little bit better. Yeah.
Marriageability.
It's like, look at this fine girl. She's
Oh, come on. It's used, you know. The people want the brand new, I guess. Anyway, so that was the point. You violated her, you hurt her in multiple ways, which is why you pay. And you marry her, but if her father objects, then you just pay out. Either way, you pay out, or whatever. Yeah.
Can she still be married?
Can she still be married?
Yeah, like if the father was like, no, I don't want you to marry her, and you have to pay bride price anyways, can she still be married, or is she like shunned forever?
No, she can marry somebody else, but not a priest, because the priest has to marry a virgin, or the high priest does. But yeah, she can still marry somebody else.
Your price will probably go too.
But you know what else is cool about that is it leaves open the possibility here. What if these two really did love each other, really were trying, but there's a moment of weakness, and he as the man should have been stronger and wasn't, and they slipped up and they did something they shouldn't do. Well, the law allowed you guys, you need to be married because you made a mistake, but still, you're committed to each other. If it's completely different, the dad can step in and say, hey, no, you're not going to be with this guy. You know? And that was the honorable fatherly position. The man had a lot of authority back then that he had to use very carefully. We're going to talk about that in one of the later commands too. All right. Those who live with a partner prior to marriage are 46% more likely to divorce than those who do not. And this comes from a report of the National Marriage Project based at Rutgers University and was published in Time magazine. Isn't that interesting? Their stats say 46% more likely to get a divorce if you live together with someone first. But I thought it was to help you know if you're compatible. I thought it was to help it last. Well, apparently it doesn't work that way. All right, let's... What?
I love having my dessert before dinner.
Yeah, true. Or there's the cow illustration that everyone always uses, right? Polygamy. Let's talk about polygamy for a second. What is polygamy?
Multiple wives.
Poly, monogamy. We've heard of monogamy. That's the idea of marriage, one-on-one. Polygamy would be multiple. Could be multiple husbands, multiple wives, but usually when we talk about it, we're thinking multiple wives. Why? Because men in the Bible, some of them, had multiple wives. Is that what God wanted? Well, let's talk about in the beginning. Did God design it with Adam, Eve, Eva, Yvette? What's the other girl's name?
Lilith.
Lilith.
The one who was
All right, so yeah, how did God design this whole marriage institution in the first place? I think he used one and one, right? He put two together. So monogamy, that's the kind of marriage he designed in the beginning. When did polygamy start? Does anyone remember? Think way back to your Genesis days. When did it start? Who's the line?
Abraham?
Before Abraham.
Oh.
Way back. Before the flood. What'd you say?
Cain's line.
It came from Cain's line. Now what do we know about Cain's line? They tended to be less godly. I believe it was Lamech was the guy. You can check it out. He said, "Oh, listen to me, you wives of Lamech. Hearken to me." I think were the Ada and Zillah, were that the names or whatever.
Yeah.
I killed a young man because he bothered me. Oh, look at me, I'm a tough guy. I need 2 women to make me feel good. But that was the first polygamist, and then it seemed to have been adopted and accepted from there on. However, does God ever approve it in the Bible anywhere? That is a negative. It's not. Never approved it. No instance where God ever directs a man to take a second wife while the first one is living. That's important. Nowhere in the Bible does it say that. There are some passages that are misunderstood where it sounds like, for instance, the Levirate law. Does anyone remember the Levirate law? This is something we need to have. I believe you spell it Levirate. The Levirate law. What was that law in Israel? Can anyone explain that?
Isn't that the one the Pharisees would do? So they could, like, deal with multiple women?
That was different. The Pharisees were so bad about divorce certificates that, temporary divorce, boom, I'm going out of town, want to party, come back. That was how bad they abused the law. But when we trace the law back to its source, what was this idea of the Levirate law? Because God did give it.
A brother dies, he has to take his wife.
If they're brothers, and the brother has no children, he and his wife are married, and then he dies. The Levirate law says that the other brother in line, the younger brother, needs to marry her and have children, and the children will actually be in the line of the other brothers. Because that's the honorable thing to do. That keeps offspring in the family. A lot of people look at that and say, whoa, polygamy right there, God endorsed it. No, it's not polygamy right there, God endorsed it, because you cannot prove to me that this guy over here, this younger brother, was married. It is just as likely that the younger brother is not even married yet at all. But if his older brother dies, he's going to do the honorable thing and take over for his older brother. Not just to have kids, although that's important, but to make sure she's taken care of. So she doesn't have to live the rest of her life as a widow. So there are multiple reasons for it. But the point is, it's probably not polygamy. You cannot say it's polygamy because you have the equal amount of evidence saying it's not polygamy, because it's silent on the issue. But I think it's safe to say, since God doesn't endorse it anywhere else, it's probably not polygamy at all. A guy named Dwight from The Office did some research. Not The Office, but he did some research on Old Testament polygamy, and it was very interesting what he discovered. He found 13 examples, but 12 of those examples involved people of what he would call absolute power. 3 of them were of the judges in the book of Judges, and then 9 of them were kings. When you think back about clear cases of polygamy, judges and kings, those guys were the top dogs, right? They make the law. So, doesn't it kind of make sense that among the violators in the Bible, if almost all of them are judges or kings, and this was kind of a common thing, even though God never approved it, that maybe that's one of the reasons why they weren't punished or it wasn't stopped, it was allowed to continue, because if your very leader does it and he gets away with it, there's nobody to punish the leader. You know what I'm saying? Yeah.
You said there's 13 examples and 12 or what? Or you said the 12 were?
12 of them involve someone in power, someone he calls absolute power. So that would be 9 and 3 makes 12, 9 kings, 3 judges. So of those 12 out of 13, those all involve people that they were the top of the food chain, so to speak. So it makes sense why they weren't called down on or weren't punished or whatever.
Was the one oddball just...
Yeah, I knew somebody would ask about the one oddball, and I don't think I made a note about it. Yeah.
Is it?
He said...
Would it just be Lamech or whatever the heck his name was? Or,
I don't know.
Esau
Yeah, it's hard to say though, because Lamech, Esau, and Jacob, they're very high up in their tribes too, but they also came before the law of Moses as well. And I don't know if that's what he's talking about when he says these 13 cases. Yeah, I don't know. Because you're right, there's other examples.
So it's like a post-law of Moses.
I think so. Not sure. All right, Deuteronomy 17:17 was talking about the regulations for the king. Now, what did it say for the king? The king shall not multiply, well, not horses, not too much money, and wives. Not multiply wives, right? So, it seems as though the king wasn't supposed to do that. A lot of them violated it anyway. But if that regulation applied for their king, and their king was the example for the whole land, it seems as though by extension we realize God wasn't looking for them to multiply wives. They just did. And he didn't punish them and stop them until later on. But doesn't mean he was for it. Sometimes, a lot of people question why God, doesn't get onto all these things. But a lot of times, it's different when it's us, But if they were looking back in our day and age and be like, man, every one of those guys, they have a car and they always speed in that car. Why doesn't God strike them for that? Why doesn't God smite them for that? They're thumbing their nose at God's face every time they go 1 mile an hour over the speed limit. They could control it. From their culture, looking at us, they might think that way because they're different, right? They don't understand how light that pedal is, how easy it is to just relax your foot and you're gone, how soothing the vehicle is. They don't get these things, right? Well, it's easy for us to be critical of God for the way he did things, but the point is he did things with a plan, and maybe there's just a lot of culture that we don't fully grasp in our day and age that he was working them through to get them out of polygamy. When I was in Haiti, I believe it was Mike Grant at the time, the guy who was the missionary there, brought up a point. He said, hey, we've got a situation here. There was a voodoo priest that became a Christian. And he has 7 wives. What should he do now that he's a Christian? 7 wives? What do you do? Sticky question, right? Now, some people would say, well, you go back to the one or whatever. I was of the opinion that I think he should, especially given that culture, I think he should keep his wives. I don't think he should divorce them or something, or send them all away. I think he's obligated to take care of them for the rest of their life because he committed to that in the beginning. But he's in a position that God didn't design. And culturally, we have such a problem with it. But anyway, strange stuff, right? Very, very different. Any questions on adultery? All right. What's the 8th commandment? What does it say? Exodus 20:15. Somebody read that, please.
You shall not steal.
You shall not steal. You took the words right out of my mouth, which means you stole them. All right, so what does that mean? Does the Bible teach property rights? Remember Ananias and Sapphira? Ananias and Sapphira got together to conspire a plot to cheat the church and get ahead. Did you learn that song growing up? Ananias and Sapphira song? You missed out. We sung about people dying. And how God was a cheerful giver right after that. That's great. So they're the 2 people that said, yeah, we sold this field, we gave all this money. Here's the whole money, we'll give it to you. And God struck them dead for it, right? Yes. What does Peter say to them? He said, hey, was that field not yours? And after you sold it, wasn't it free for you to do whatever you wanted with the money? And what's the answer to that question? Was it theirs? Were they free to do whatever they wanted with the money?
Yep.
Yeah. So does the Bible teach property rights?
Yeah.
Yes. And that, by the way, was at a time when the church was selling and giving to everyone as they have need. And some people want to say that that's what God wants us to do, be a giant commune or something. Well, no, because even at the time when they were being that, the very scriptures that they look to verify or try to defend that position are ones that Peter himself says, hey, this is yours. You do what you want with it. So the Bible teaches that. What kind of property do we possess? Well, there's obviously the physical. We all have physical property. My shirt, somebody gave me, my shoes, your shirt, your bag, your Bible. Is there any other kind of property besides the physical?
Intellectual property.
Yeah, we talk about intellectual property. What is that?
Like, that's my music.
Yeah, we use it for things like music. What else? Articles, stuff that's written. Art stuff. Okay.
Intangible things.
Yeah. Now some things are clearly physical, like the art. Well, this is my piece of art, my paper, everything. You can't steal it from me. But what if somebody completely duplicates every single bit of it, but doesn't go through the hard work of creating it themselves or anything? They just steal from you. Well, there's an idea. There's sort of like this idea of, wait, there's intellectual property is what we defined it as, right? And that makes sense. Your ideas originated from you. Now, typically they came somewhere else long before that. But the point is, we shouldn't be in the business of taking other people's things for ourselves, right? Taking things that aren't there. Now it gets carried too far away, and we don't want to take it too far. But the general idea seems to be, if they're the ones that came up with the idea, they get the credit for the idea. It's fair. It's right. So we don't take the idea and then pretend like it's our own idea. Now in the intellectual world, a lot of times you can take people's ideas right and left, just give them credit for it, cite them properly, you know what I mean? Which you guys do all the time, so. Physical property, intellectual property, yeah. What are methods of this thing we call stealing? How would you do it? Come on, get your mind in the gutter for a minute. Tell me how you're going to steal.
Legally download
Down,
Sneak
okay.
into your garage, which is never locked.
You're going to download something.
So a spring-loaded door.
All right, yeah, you could download something. And what makes that stealing? There are a lot of non-stealing downloads, so how does downloading make it somehow magically stealing?
You don't have permission to take it.
Okay, so you're getting backdoor access to something without paying for it by someone who doesn't have the right to own it in the first place, right? So yeah, that's a good way of taking intellectual property. What are some other things, yeah?
The bootleg store in Cocoa. Found that
This
one
store
out.
in Cocoa specifically at this address.
Well, yeah, you guys told me I was bad for buying.
Well, no, we said you were double bad because you're paying for something that you could get for free. You're still stealing it. So that's twice as bad in my mind. At least if you're going to steal and don't pay.
Steal smartly.
Doesn't that make sense to you guys? I don't get it.
Steal.
But you gotta break the law and just break it right. Don't break it wrong. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, yeah, that's a good point. So I'm gonna make a quick list here. All right, what's this word? Fraud. What is fraud? Now I heard the story of a guy that went through college and couldn't pronounce Freud's name properly. He always called him fraud. That's what we shall call him. Yeah. So, what is fraud?
Toasted.
Pretending to be somebody you're not.
Okay.
I'm getting toasted.
In order to what? Usually in order to get something, right? Like insurance fraud seems to be a big one. What is that? You pretend you stage an accident or whatever to get a nice payout when you wasn't really. Set your business on fire. All right, there's fraud. There is this other one. Cheating. How does cheating stealing? Think about that.
Oftentimes you think of cheating, people who cheat, they try to win something. So really, in cheating, you're taking the victory, which isn't yours because you got it in
You're
a way
taking
that...
something that you did not earn.
Mhm.
So if you cheat on a test, how's that stealing?
You didn't study for it.
You didn't know the information like you're supposed to. You took the information and used it when you didn't properly have it stored like you're supposed to, right? Yeah, that's the idea of cheating. When you cheat, that is a form of stealing.
How'd you
It's
know I
also another
cheated?
form of lying.
On your test.
No, you didn't cheat. You would have done better.
That was good.
But this is the government. This is the government's form, all right? And we're, you know what? As good as our government is at times, we're allowed to call them out for some things. It's freedom of speech. Redistribution. Redistribution. What is that?
Like, what do you buy? A Snickers bar?
Oh, it's all right. Stickers, yes.
Because it says like for
Continue to sell it
not,
again.
not for resale.
Okay, that's an interesting way of putting it. Now, they didn't label it for that. I don't know if we're not free to sell it again or not. I'm thinking of when the government, and the reason why I say government is because they're the ones that are allowed to legally steal from you. They're the only ones that I know of. They're allowed to take your money through taxes, right? We all vote on it, so in a sense we do that. Well, if they decide to take your money and put it somewhere else where it didn't need to go in the first place, now they are government. I'm not saying we don't pay taxes or we don't give to them anyway, but morally, is that a problem? Well, redistributing wealth, if I came into this class and I said, okay, you guys, we're going to take $5 from every one of you and we're going to give it to, Willie in there because I feel like he needs to buy himself a new shirt. Well, if you willingly gave $5, that's fine. But if I made you pay $5, there's something wrong with that, right? If I forcibly took $5 from you and made it all over, that's redistributing something that did belong to you.
Or also saying it was for Willie's shirt, but then buying yourself a shirt. So like lying about the reason.
Oh,
That's
that's
You
a
know,
double
like-
whammy there.
Yeah,
That's a double whammy.
like those charities.
It's a good thing the government doesn't do stuff like that.
Yeah, that's right.
But anyway, yeah, redistributing wealth, it needs to be done properly because that's abusing authority is basically what that is. So, okay, a lot of methods. But as a Christian, did you know, even to non-Christians, stealing is a bad thing? Have you noticed that? Now, not everyone's the same or whatever. Like, I realize there are people that make their living stealing things, right? But let's go with some sort of a gang or whatever. When a gang robs a bank, they don't have a problem with it, they do it again. But what if another gang robs that gang? How does that work out for them? Do they have a problem with that when that happens?
That's a no-no, bro.
Yeah, you crossed into their code of ethics. All of a sudden, stealing matters to them. You know what I mean? And anyone who says that morality doesn't exist, if you steal from them, all of a sudden morality exists. That was wrong what you just did, because that was mine. You took it. You know what I mean? Everyone does that. But we as Christians, we have an even greater layer of offense going on here, because when we steal, we're already violating the code of ethics everyone knows exists. Everyone knows it's wrong to steal stuff that's not yours. But everything here on earth came here and is owned by who?
God.
And so if you decide to take something that God didn't allow you to have for yourself, who are you stealing from?
Yeah.
You're stealing not only from that person, but there's a sense in which you're stealing from God too. So you see, as a Christian, the problem, you've got a double offense going on here. You're robbing from another person and, in a sense, robbing from God too. So as Christians, we have all the more reason to never want to steal, because it's such a problem. Now, I think you guys understand this. If I were to take this tablet that I like and I loan it to a friend, I loan it to Gabe, and Gabe's working on his paper, and he finally gets his paper all done, and then Tyler runs over, steals the tablet from Gabe, and runs away. Well, Gabe just lost his paper, So Gabe's probably going to be pretty upset, right? So would you just, by that definition, have you just stolen from Gabe? Well, yeah, you've stolen from Gabe, but you know who else is going to be a little upset with you, Tyler? Me, because that was my tablet, and it cost a lot of money, and you stole it. From him, I know, but he was borrowing it from me. So you stole his paper, and you stole it. So you see how one thievery could apply to both of us? So if we steal from somebody else, we're also stealing from God, too. Same idea, because all of it's God's.
What if you steal it back from me?
I steal it back.
It's
Justice.
Technically, just you taking back.
Justice. Justice. All right. Interesting thing. Let's go ahead and read Exodus 22. Oh, there's a lot of verses there, and there's not a lot of time for us. But please turn with me to Exodus 22. It's just a few pages over from Exodus 20. There's some interesting things here in this passage I want us to go over.
Cement for mouthwash.
Exodus 20.
Exodus 22, we're going to take the first part of this, probably almost the first 17 verses. There's a lot about stealing there, okay? If a man steals an ox or a sheep and slaughters it or sells it, he must pay back 5 head of cattle for the ox and 4 sheep for the sheep. If a thief is caught breaking in and is... let's pause for a second. How much was the penalty that they had to take care of? Well, if he steals an ox or a sheep, how much does he pay back? 4 or 5 times as much. That's what Zacchaeus said he'd pay back for all the taxes he stole. 4 times what he cheated people. He was fulfilling the Old Testament law of recompense, making things right, giving back. So that's a steep standard for stealing right there. Now, verse 2 and 3 might bug people a bit. If a thief is caught breaking in and is struck so that he dies, the defender is not guilty of bloodshed. But if it happens after sunrise, he is guilty of bloodshed. A thief must certainly make restitution, but if he has nothing, he must be sold to pay for his theft. Now, a couple of things happen there, yeah?
So, they're saying basically if you're going to steal, do it during the day so
Sounds that way, doesn't
you
it?
are less likely to be killed.
It sounds that way. That's what I thought you guys might have trouble with. So what's going on here? Well, one of the things I think is going on here is
Well, yeah.
in the daytime you can see them. At night you can't. So what the law is probably trying to guard against is the idea of you just really wanted to kill somebody because you were so mad at them. So all you had to do was all I have to do is to get Gabe alone in the house for just a little bit and I kill him. All I have to do is say he was trying to steal from me and I stopped him. And I get away with murder for free. You know what I mean? So this was probably a safeguard against things like that. So I realize it's difficult either way, but that's probably what it was. So you couldn't get away with murder, which would be a much greater offense to get away with. So at night, all bets are off. You know what? Nobody saw anything. But during the day, we can investigate this more carefully. And you shouldn't be killing people. Now, beyond that, I'm not sure.
I was thinking too, back then it's not like they had flashlights and electricity to quickly turn the light on. They probably had light, so if something was happening, wouldn't have been able to see it. So I don't know, just think less people more likely to actually break in at night.
Yeah, that's a
Or
good
in the
point.
dark.
Yes, looks like
Thing, but still. Oh, there are many more things in this passage. You can look at it in your own time. I'd like to get through here. All right, so let's talk about the unique stuff in Israel, because there are a lot of unique things about their system. Every 7 years, references Deuteronomy 15, 1 through 6. Every 7 years, Deuteronomy 15, 1 through 6, debts were canceled. Forgiveness. Loan forgiveness, debt forgiveness, credit card forgiveness, everything. Gone every 7 years. If you were a slave, a debtor slave, which, by the way, what did we just read? That person that if he can't pay it back, he sells himself as a slave. That would be a debtor slave. Debtor slaves are released every 7 years. That was the... By the way, what would be the 7th year? If there's 7, which year would that be? Think about it. If there's 6 days in a row and then there's the 7th day, what day is that? The Sabbath day. So we call this year the what year? Sabbath year. That's the idea. It was a Sabbath year. Yeah, that's what it was. If there was a fellow Israelite, this reference comes from Exodus 22, verse 25. Exodus 22, verse 25 and 26. If a poor person was a fellow Israelite, you can give them a loan, but you cannot charge interest at all. Not allowed to do that. Foreigners were different. You were allowed to with the foreigners, but not with a fellow Israelite if they're poor. You can't do that. Every 3 years, a local, this comes from Deuteronomy 14, verse 28. Sorry, I should tell you that. Deuteronomy 14, 28. Yeah?
I had a quick question about the 7-year thing.
Sure.
So was it, let's say that a slave has to be in for 7 years. Is it 7 years from the time that he starts, or is it like every certain day in 7 years? Like, so you could potentially only work for a day in that 7th
I need
year.
to check this out, but I'm pretty sure it actually is the 7th year, I think.
Okay.
I know that's how it works with Jubilee. I don't know if that's how it works with the slavery or not, but I thought there was the sabbatical year that everyone was released on.
So, and then so they only bought
So if
slaves
it was
for
year
the
6.
price that was gonna, like, for that next year,
I think that's how it
Same
works.
thing
I
for
need to
big
check
houses
that out
and
again,
stuff.
though. Yeah?
So, I just heard you come up. I heard you say sabbatical, like we say today that someone's on sabbatical. Is that kind of where you get that from?
I think so. I think it's the same kind of idea because it's a sabbatical year where you let the crops go. And that was another thing. They weren't allowed to harvest crops. You're supposed to just let the field lie dormant. Talk about trusting God. Like, wait, that's how we live. That's how we eat. That's how we do everything. Yep. Let it go.
Phone calls. I had to watch
Just
everyone
let it go.
So what did they do that whole year? Just sit
Chill.
around like,
Worry.
That is how card games work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sure they could figure out how to
yeah,
occupy their
the
time.
Jubilee year, be
You
like
got so many
49 was
books.
They
great
probably
and
prepared for the
50
next
was
year.
2 years. Like,
All right. Couldn't charge interest. Every 3 years they had a local tithe. Deuteronomy 14, 28, and 29. And this tithe was for the poor. People who could not afford to take care of themselves, and people who were Levites as well, because they didn't have an allotment of property to take care of themselves. So there was every 3 years there was a local tithe, and they used it to take care of their poor. But that's not the only thing they did for the poor, too. You remember what else they did to take care of the poor people? Yeah, whenever they're harvesting their fields, right, pulling the good food out, they would deliberately leave some of the corners and the edges. It's kind of debatable whose property that is anyway, possibly. Leave that there. And then if they made it pass through their entire field, what were they not allowed to do?
Go back.
They were not allowed to go back again to get anything they missed. If they missed it, just leave it there. They were for who? All this stuff was there for who?
Poor.
The poor, the aliens, the widows, the people who were down and out. They could come and they could gather food and they could eat. They wouldn't starve to death under this system. And this is in addition to the every 3 years they had a tithe to take care of the poor people too. There's a lot of good giving for the poor. Do you know someone in Scripture who kept themselves and their mom alive by harvesting this leftover grain that was just sitting on the ground?
Ruth.
Ruth and her mother-in-law named
man,
Naomi. Yeah. That's how she met her husband, was by being a hard worker in the field.
Oh, yeah.
Until her husband was like, hey, just drop some more for her. Make sure, oops, oh man, oops. Just dropping all this.
Can't go back and get that.
It's a beautiful thing.
My bad.
Okay, every 50 years, this comes from Leviticus 25, just the whole chapter, Leviticus 25. Every 50 years, that would be 7 Sabbaths, 7 sabbatical years, approximately, right? So every 7th year, 7 of those, they're going to equal 49. So the 49th year leads to the 50th. You have a Jubilee is what they call it. What happened in Jubilee? Jubilee was probably a huge celebration. Everything reverted back in the year of Jubilee. Jubilee was a once-in-a-lifetime thing, right? Most people weren't breaking 100, so once every 50 years, what happened? Not only did the typical stuff happen, if you were a slave, even a slave for life, you were set free in the year of Jubilee. If you owned property from somebody, you bought property from somebody else and it is now yours. Once the year of Jubilee rolls around, everything goes back to its original owner. All the property, all the stuff, everything. It's like a giant reset button on life. Every 50 years. So what is the beauty of that? The beauty of that is if you completely ruined your life because you're a miserable failure and you lost all your money and slaves and everything, the year of Jubilee comes, you get a mulligan on life. You get to start over as a rich man like you were before or whatever. Everything resets. So how, you might wonder, and God took care of this, how did they sell property? How did they manage this stuff? Well, what they did, remember, why do you buy property? You buy property to grow food so that you can eat or sell it, make money. That's how it happened. So when you were buying property, every year you get another crop, so you're paying for the number of crops you want. So if there is 30 years left till Jubilee, and Parker says he's doing well and I need money and he wants to buy my property, I sell it to him, he's going to pay me a decent amount of money because he knows he can get 30 good years of crop out of that property for himself. But after 30 years, it's going back to me because it's the year of Jubilee. Now, what if Jubilee was coming up in 2 years? Parker can still buy the property from me, but do you think he's going to pay as much? Absolutely not. He's only going to pay me a real little bit. Why? Because he's only paying for 2 crops, essentially. 2 years of working my field for his benefit. Yeah?
So what if you started out poor and then actually like work yourself up to actually own something decent, and
It
then
seems to be you.
yeah, like what's the well, I mean, what's the point of, I guess, working
But
towards that if
I
you
think
know,
most of them didn't really start out poor, because when Joshua and they came into the land and divided it out, I think everyone was doing very well at that time. They all, and that was kind of the point. They had all their tribes, their boundaries, everything set up. Because it wasn't as though like, oh, rich people, poor people, or whatever. No, they came from slaves in Egypt walking through a wilderness. So when they come into the land, they're distributing it out to everyone, and God's involved in that process. So there shouldn't.
all those people that are getting help from the tithing and the drops
Yeah,
and
yeah.
everything. I mean, what if
Well, I think
they
people are going to
Right.
constantly be becoming poor, and besides that, husbands die, and besides that, foreigners coming in are all benefiting from that because they don't have an inheritance there. You know what I mean? A widow has nobody to take care of the field. She doesn't have the property rights like others do. Foreigners don't have that either. So God had to have a system to take care of these people because they're going to be there.
So then, does the Jubilee affect them if they, you know what I mean?
Potentially, because what if, I believe, because if they were sold as slaves,
Right.
They're
Or
getting out.
what if they ended up being able to like purchase property and stuff? And
yet everyone knew this is the way it works. You purchased a number of crops until Jubilee. So if they purchased property and they got 30 good crops, even though the property reverts back, they're sitting on a pile of money. They're doing pretty well for themselves.
So they
Maybe
can-
they could buy a smaller lot
Okay.
for another 50 years, and then they'll be dead anyway. You know, at the end of their life. So it's
But
just a
still-
different sort of system.
Because they're still saving up all those extra crops they're not eating anymore.
Yeah. You know what I like about it though?
That too.
I like about this. It's not completely fair. You know, when you think about it, it's not really fair. It's cool and it's neat, and it is fair in the sense that we're all going through this together. But this giant reset built into a community is not intuitive to me. I think there's a lesson in Jesus here. You and I have never earned ourselves a giant reset on life. We're the people who are like have made ourselves poor, you know, and hopeless, and then Jesus, aka Jubilee, comes around, and all of a sudden we're rich again. We get all this, and we didn't deserve it. Even in the Old Covenant, I just see a powerful lesson there. I think God's trying to teach us, hey, you don't deserve this. This is called grace. This is where you get to start over, even though you haven't earned it all. Yeah.
So even tax collectors have to like give back, or the government just keeps it?
We didn't have tax.
Yeah, that came along in Jesus' day because they would just pay the tithes to the temple and the tabernacle and to the priests and everything to take care of them. All right, got a couple more commandments to get through. Do not bear false witness. That's 2016. Okay, real quickly. Bearing false witness. What would that be?
Wait,
Lying.
so
Lying.
something-
Essentially, that's lying, right?
But it can also be done, like most people relate lying to like something negative to benefit you, but you could be lying and be like, oh no, I did not see him kill that person, and
For the
it'd be
benefit
like
of somebody else.
right, it'd be like if your husband, you saw your husband kill somebody, and you're like,
Mhm.
oh, I know that there's laws for that, but anyways,
Sure.
you know, you saw your best friend kill someone, and you're like, oh no, they were with me the whole time, you know, blah blah blah, and that's essentially it's saving them, but you're lying in process.
Yeah. Bearing false witness, doesn't that have a little bit of a legal tone to it?
Mm-hmm.
Bearing false witness makes it sound like you're testifying at court, doesn't it? No, the principle of lying is still the same. You have a question or you just...
No, doing that church thing.
Yeah. So, it seems to have a legal flavor to it. It seems like the idea is really justice that we're getting at here. How is it justice? Well, there's truth, and truth deserves to be heard by those who deserve to get truth. You know, we are supposed to be truthful to people. Now, what throws people off, and it throws me off at times too, is sometimes there are these weird exceptions. The whole point of truth is that what's right needs to endure. The good needs to happen, because that's what God is. God is good, and He is true. But are there cases in Scripture where people withhold the truth?
Yes.
Yeah, there are. Somebody look up 1 Samuel 16, 1 through 3 for me. 1 Samuel 16, 1 through 3. While you're looking that up, one thing that also fits under here is under the law, if somebody, a child or a wife, made a vow that the father deemed to be dumb or misplaced, the father under the Old Testament could say, no, I'm releasing you of that. You should not have done that. Which is interesting. The father could release a son or daughter or his wife from a vow. If she or they made a vow that the father determined that was rash, you should not have done that, he had the authority to release them from that.
I totally thought you were like, if mom told the kid that the dad was dumb today. He could be like, no, that's not
No, not like that.
Sorry.
Yeah, it's really cool. And by the way, I appeal to that one today because I see no reason why that principle hasn't changed. But if my kid puts themselves in a stupid vow, I will come in as the father and say, no, I'm her dad, and she's not doing that. Simple as that. And under the Old Testament, that's how it worked. And I don't see anything in the New Testament that changed it. So keep that in mind. That might work for you someday. However, if the dad didn't say anything, then they're bound by it. Yeah.
Is it just for the daughter and the wife? You couldn't do that for the son?
No, son too.
Oh, son too.
Any child or daughter. Sorry, child, wife, or girl. Dog, I guess, if the dog tried.
I think it says unmarried daughter too.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that's a good point. Because it'd be a little late if they're, you can't do that. No, they're one now. It's too late.
Can't see that.
Okay. They're laughing. We got to go. 1 Samuel 16, 1 through 3. What does it say?
The Lord said to Samuel, how long will you grieve over Saul?
For I have rejected him. Now, hold on a second. Samuel is going to pick out another king. Saul's been rejected as king. Saul doesn't want this to happen. So Samuel's thinking, that's the context. Keep reading.
Since I have rejected him for being king over Israel, fill your horn with oil and go. I will send you to Jesse the Bethlehemite, for I have provided for myself a king among his sons. And Samuel said, how can I go? If Saul hears it, he will kill me. And the Lord said, take a heifer with you and say, I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. And invite Jesse to the sacrifice. And I will show you what you should do. And you shall anoint for him, him whom I declare to you. What?
No, that's good. Samuel's worried. He said, Saul's going to kill me if he sees me going to anoint somebody else's king. So God says, don't tell him that. You just bring this heifer, this cow. You just say, I'm going to offer a sacrifice, and this guy's going with me. That's it. And that's what he told Saul. And so Saul thought, oh, okay, just usual stuff. And he went and he anointed him as king. He deceived Saul. He tricked him. But God told him to. I think you can do it if God... Now, did God tell him to lie? Well, you could make an argument to say that maybe because the idea of lying is withholding the truth from people that deserve to know it. Well, Saul deserved to know it. No. Did he have a right to know it? No. If you have no right to the truth, you don't get the truth. And there's nothing wrong with people tricking you, keeping it away from you. That is the way it is. So it happens in wartime a lot, all throughout the Bible. If somebody, comes, breaks down the door with a gun and says, anyone else here, you better not tell them other people are there, okay? I'm not saying you should lie flat out to them, although my conscience might not be bothered if I did, because in my mind I'd be like, nope, not other people that you deserve to know about. No. That's what I'd be thinking at that moment. But the point is, they're violating God's law. They have no right to know that information. You can withhold it from them. That's not what lying is, right? It's the truth when people have a right to the truth. And we all have a right to the truth most of the time, right? There are only certain things that we don't have a right to. You know what I mean? So that kind of makes sense. It's a very important distinction, though. So there's that small element where tricking somebody is justified in the Bible, and I think with good reason, because people are trying to go against God. You do not help them go against God by telling the truth, the factual truth. Now here's another thing. If somebody says, hey, people do this to my dad all the time. Hey, are you the pastor at that church? Well, sometimes he says yes, sometimes he says no. Is he lying? Why not?
Well,
because in some people's minds, he knows. In some people's minds, when they say pastor, they really mean a preacher, and he understands that. Rather than get into a debate, they'll say yes, he's telling the truth. Other times he'll say no, is he telling the truth? Yeah, because factually he's not a pastor, and you'll have to explain that too. So you can say the same words, but still lie or not lie. It's a tricky thing. You have to recognize, am I communicating the truth to someone who deserves to know the truth, who has the right to the truth? And last but not least, number 10, do not covet. That covers pretty much anything that he missed in the other 9. Coveting your neighbor's house, your neighbor's donkey. Ooh, you want that donkey, huh? Shiny new donkey. You want it, you can't have it. What is the idea of coveting? Tell me, what is coveting?
Wanting it so they don't have it.
Okay, wanting it so they don't have it, or?
Jealousy, envying.
Yes, a strong jealousy, something that is off limits to you that you want for yourself anyway.
Not being satisfied with what God has already given.
Sure. That's exactly what this is. So, does that mean that if you see someone in a nice new sports car and you think to yourself, man, I wish I could have a sports car. I hope someday I can get one. That'd be so cool. Have you just coveted? No, you haven't coveted. Now, if you're trying to take the keys, then maybe you're coveting. For sure. But coveting, I think it has multiple things. If you said to yourself, no, I want that sports car, that specific one, and I'm going to take it as soon as he gives me the opportunity. That's an idea of coveting. Why? Because that specific one, you can never have it. It's not yours. It's this guy's. He bought it. He owns it. Now, for you to want something like that, maybe it's not bad, or maybe that's greed. Maybe that's another sin you need to work on. But I don't think it's necessarily coveting unless you strongly want something. Now, here's the other thing. What if I want a sports car so bad, but I know I can't afford one, but if I rob a bank, I could afford one? See? So I'm going to buy it properly, fair and square. I'm going to rob that bank and go buy that sports car. Is that coveting? I'm telling you this, yes, it's coveting. Why? Because in order to get the sports car, you have to rob a bank. And is robbing a bank in your limit? No, it's not. So you've engaged in a form of coveting if you're seriously going to rob the bank to get that car. Yeah.
Say your neighbor has a sports car. Having ill feelings towards your neighbor because they have a sports car and you don't, wouldn't that also be considered coveting? Because it's affecting the way that you treat
Yes.
them.
Anything that leads you to a position of being off limits like that. In other words, you are not being loving to your neighbor. That's sinful. That's a sin. Why are you doing it? Because of this object that I want. Yeah, that would lend itself to coveting too. Which is why this is a very broad, kind of encompassing command that if you missed it in the first 9, this will probably pick it up. You know, another problem, and you brought this up, Cart, with the Jews, but have you ever heard people say something like, well, I'll just commit that sin and then I'll repent later? You know what I mean? There are some people too, like the sin of divorce, like, well, I know divorce is something sinful, but I'll just get divorced, marry somebody else, and then later on I'll repent. You know what? That's a good example of committing the sin of coveting. If you're seriously considering something like that, that's what this is. It's something that is off limits, but you're going to try to make it work for yourself anyway. So, any questions on this? Thank you, guys.
No, thank you. What?
I don't want it. Thank you.
Glad you're tired.
No, I don't want it.
Okay.
Stop that.
Dude, Chrissy. Bella's got pipes of an angel.
Pipes of an angel? Like singing?
Yeah. She can hold it too. Most kids.
What? But we all know there are no examples of angels singing in the Bible, so how do you know types of an
Darn
angel?
right. They're only explaining.
Is this still going?
And whenever
Glory to God.
Oh yeah, I guess we should turn it off.
Glory to God.
Yeah, don't you think too that the fact that everyone is scared to death of an angel means that their voice is terrible?
However, I think
Don't be afraid. You know?
Don't be afraid.